Turn this off. Boards. Board games, it's what we're talking about. Board games, I'm not gonna shout. We are starting off this streaming with a bit of music making, and over here, this is a person known as Chris. Chris is also making noises as we might start to enjoy this. We're going to be talking about playtesting and how it is kind of like sharing some gathering called a meeting. That is the theory that Chris is hypothesizing. Board games, I'm not gonna shout. Board games, it's what we're talking about. Hey, good morning, everyone.
What's up?
And hello, Tate. It is lovely to have you with us. And yeah, you're kind of winning that spot as the #1 fan. I am Bez. This is bedtime in some countries, and we are blethering about board games. And today we are chatting about chairperson theory of playtesting. Can you, without going too much into it, why did you suggest this as a topic?
Yeah, so as some people might know, I help with the virtual playtesting group, and one thing that comes up a lot in that playtesting group, obviously, is the feedback part. You've gotten your game on the list, you have taught your game, you have played your game, and once that's done, the most important time for you as a designer is the feedback time. And I've had the wonderful opportunity to see how dozens of designers over the last 5 months now have approached this topic. How do they approach feedback? How do they want to do feedback? And from that, I'm sort of developing this, what I'm calling the chairperson theory, in as a way of explaining the best case scenario, or you could call it a best practice if you want, but a best case scenario for getting the feedback that really moves your game forward.
Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of overlap, I understand, and we'll get into the definitions and what this means for everyone and how they can take this on in a wee bit after the regular features. Good morning, Alan Oughton, it's lovely to see you. And yeah, let's get stuck into the brilliant thing, what's the little thing which is brilliant? Do you have a suggestion today, or shall we talk about socks?
Socks. I was going to talk about coffee and how...
I think we've talked about coffee. I mean, Sates has been keeping track, apparently.
I love that. I am a fan of coffee. Apparently, some folks are a fan of tea. I find that when it comes to coffee, I have really the same mental processes before coffee as I have after coffee. But what I've also found is that there is kind of a diminishing return. It's usually about the end of cup 2, leading into cup 3, that you kind of go, okay, I'm reaching that peak of the curve, and then it just begins to kind of fall downhill. You then get too hyper for your own good. I don't know if that happens to other people, but you can kind of tell where you are in a stage based on where you are in that diminishing returns. But talk to us about socks, Bez.
I mean, that makes sense. And hello, Chris. It is lovely to see you. And Chris is apparently currently drinking coffee. But we have already chatted about coffee. I mean, it's still brilliant for some people. If that's what you choose, then good for you. But yeah, socks are just, even when you're at home, they keep your feet warm. That's just a nice thing. And if you're out and about, they stop you sweating into your shoes. Instead, you sweat into the sock. And that sock is easier to wash and eventually replace than the shoes. it's like a shoe liner. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So to me, socks have two purposes. Firstly, as a shoe liner, kind of to stop all your crud getting right into the shoe, and secondly, as a warmth for when it's a bit chilly and you're at home and maybe wandering around, you don't want to have bare feet. So socks, I actually quite like socks, and sometimes I'm just going to show.
Here's some socks I've heard earlier.
Yeah, it's quite a fluffy sock.
Those are fun. Yeah, actually,
So-
funny story. I heard so it was in the mall the other weekend, and someone I noted that some socks actually say liner on the sock, like that's a sport term for a sock these days. And my thought was, why would you call a sock a liner? It technically is. It is a a barrier, a buffer between your foot and the shoe. But was there some problem with the word sock that the word liner needed to get put into place?
I think what I've seen with those ones is that they're kind of really short socks, so
Yeah.
they don't even appear above the rim of the shoe. And say it's like we just have different opinions. I like my feet to be warm.
I do like the fluffy socks at times when it's cold or when the ground is cold. I do want to mention that if you find yourself in a place that has cold floors, have you ever been to Korea, Des?
I have not yet been to Korea, and I just want to remind people that me flashing up things on this screen does not suggest that I agree with them.
So,
hello, Jess. Lovely to see you. Enjoy your party. But yeah, regular viewers will know that yeah, I am planning a trip to Korea in the not too distant future. Like,
okay, yeah. So yeah, when you get to Korea, you will probably discover the ondol floor heating system. It's basically, think of it as pipes of hot water that run below the floor, and when you turn it on, the heat just kind of rises from below the floor up through the rest of the room. So the floor is somewhere between. You can feel a bit of the warmth, but when you turn it up all the way and there's not a lot of insulation between your feet and the floor, you will feel it. So, I don't know how energy efficient it is, but it is one of those traditional heating methods that has been used for centuries now, and it's been refined over the years. But it's still a thing you'll find even in modern day apartment buildings.
I mean, sometimes it's not just even about. Sometimes it's about just wanting that cozy like comfort. It's like a hug for your feet.
Fair.
Hey, when did I say I don't wear socks? I don't think I've ever said this. I mean, I don't wear socks all the time. I don't wear socks when I'm in the shower. I don't wear socks when I'm swimming.
Well, Bez, you have hundreds of hours of video online. It's possible at some point in that time you have said at some point, I don't wear socks, or I don't like socks, or something like that. And here's where we cut to Alan finding that video and then posting it online. So.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move to the recent highlights. Recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights. Recent highlights, playing games and other delights. Recent highlights. I played one game, I think 5 times. I played Digital, which is a game for the 2020 LDEC Design Contest. I played it 2-player with my dad. We played 2 games as written, and then we played 3 games with a slightly smaller grid, which I felt worked well. And I gave that feedback to the designer, who said that they might be able to try that and give their own input. It's been interesting, even with the games that we thought, okay, this is 100% done. As I've played it, that maybe 4th or 5th time, there have been other ideas emerging. But Digital, for those who don't know, it's all about originally called because you're meant to use your fingers to represent your playing piece, which is quite an interesting idea. But imagine if you had to do that for Snakes and Ladders. I mean, it's just a bit of a pain, frankly, using your finger. So in the original playtest video, we all ended up using like a stone or something from the garden, or an apple. And yesterday, my dad and I ended up using 2 candles. So we had like very short candles, admittedly, about this tall, but like just putting them down. And when you only need 1 playing piece per person, I don't see that as an issue. It's even less, problematic than pen and paper. I could use, if I have pen and paper, I could, tear up 4 bits of paper, I guess, unless we're outside and the wind might blow them away. But even though the digital thing is a very neat solution, and that might stay in the rule sheet, basically it's about moving your bits around the board, making words, removing cards, and not trying to not get stuck in a hey that's my fish / battle sheet manner. And it's 100% about staying on this island and so forth. It was generally within 1 or 2 turns of each other that we would be the one to lose. But it's a nice way of kind of passing a bit of time, and it was enjoyable, and we carried on enjoying it.
Nice. I don't get to play as many published games as I used to, but
I mean, who said that was published?
Oh, I know. So obviously, within the playtesting world, I get to playtest a lot of really cool stuff. And one of the favorite games I playtested last night in the virtual playtesting group was by a guy named Steven Schwartz, who made a game called Stagecraft. And you could think of this as a worker placement game about putting on an opera show. So you are hiring artists. You are putting your cards from your hand as a stage manager. You are basically fulfilling the different roles that are needed to put on an opera, whilst at the same time trying to recruit patrons to buy the tickets. And the show goes on when you sell enough tickets, and you score points based on how many of your people are part of that show. And of course, there's room to bump someone else out of place if the person you're about to add is a higher number, a higher quality sort of person. So some really interesting things happening in that game. I definitely look forward to playtesting it again. And to answer the question, must you sing operatic while playing? You probably don't want to hear that. I mean, I was in the choir for 4 years, and I wouldn't really even want to try operatic because I would be afraid of, permanently damaging someone's hearing or whatnot. But and then you've got the average playtester who may have some musical talent. Maybe they did a karaoke night a couple of years ago, but that would be a fun game though, where everything that must be spoken must be sung. That could be a fun game.
Whoops, sorry about that. To me, it sounds more like a fun activity. Like, we don't need everything to be a game. I mean, with a measure of success.
Maybe not. Activities are fine as well.
Xates has a highlight that they made someone believe that winning the LDEC competition was a prerequisite for getting the job. This is true. Like, you can imagine the backstory. I was fooled for about maybe 2 seconds. And like, there was definitely some thing. Xates talks about operatic singing in a strategic Euro. That sounds interesting. I know that there have been strategic games that mix dexterity in, like you've got Awesome by One Free Elephant up in Scotland, and you've got Mega City Oceania by the somewhat larger Hub Games. Talking about highlights, Alan Outson's played a few solo Tabletopia games, including Mr. Cabbagehead. I'm assuming you mean Mr. Cabbagehead, and this isn't a totally different game with a eerily similar title. That would be very odd if there was a totally different game called My Cabbagehead. But Mr. Cabbage Head, assuming it's the one from Todd Sanders with weird art that's like public domain, if you know what I mean, which is a really interesting way of doing your art, to say, hey, there's these anthropomorphic cabbages and vegetables, let's just chuck them all into a game. That was a cool.
Yeah, it's got a really cool set of art, that game.
Yeah, and talking about socks, Jess apparently wears socks, and Alan has apparently found a thing. So I am going to put this up. I'm going to, what I said. Oh, whoops! What happened there? Let me try and share it again. Okay. So I've just unplugged myself. Let's see what happens.
Many words as I can within so many minutes, but maybe that's not appropriate. Maybe it's better to focus on the end results and make it into actual work. Comparatively, spades are exactly the same. In that spades, you don't want them all the time. You only really want them when you're, digging a hole, or, if you're playing some strange spade-related activity like subverting the nature of a spade. But for their purpose, a spade or indeed a shovel, both of them are quality things.
I'm not talking about socks.
That we have people making these tools that are very specifically about one thing. And Dave asks, no games, when did you last have a game-free day? Which is...
that's been 30 seconds, and I've not said anything about socks.
And why are indeed spades...
I'm going to call shenanigans.
I've not done any research into that. But what I have done a tiny bit of...
I've got two messes on the screen. What do I do?
Yeah, I'm going to pause that. And yeah, if you find the thing, then sure. But anyway...
Now Alan has two messes on their screen trying to find.
No, Alan is asking me to do this. I'm not doing this work. I mean, you are the person who claims that I've been saying that I don't wear socks. I don't believe that I said I don't wear socks. Anyway, so we have had some highlights. I might have said some things. I've said a lot of things, but let's move on to the questionably quick questions. And this is where the silliest questions are all welcome. And so feel free to chime in and ask Chris anything you would like, or if you want to ask both of us, you can do that. And we'll start with Alex's question for the week, which is, would you prefer a meeple-sized duck or a duck-sized meeple?
A meeple-sized duck. I feel like I could go on a tour with them, but a duck-sized meeple could be fun, like the ultimate sort of first player mark. You want to know who's first player? Okay, here you go. Just kind of drop it on the table. Nice, 5 kilo sort of meeple.
Solid wood.
Yeah, we test the construction of your $2,000 board game table with our duck-sized meeple. Boom. Just see what happens.
Sate says, if you could only ever eat one food that starts with B again, what would you pick? I mean, how many foods are there that starts with B? What is your favorite food? What comes to mind for you?
Well, if I would never turn down a good pizza, but with B,
baguette, Bovril,
burrito, probably.
Burrito's a good one. Yeah, that's a pretty good one. I can't think of anything else like bread. Yeah, beans. Broth. I mean, it's also like if you've got broth, like at what point?
Don't say broccoli. Don't say broccoli.
Why not?
Well, if that's your one food that starts with B, then you don't get all these other foods. No beef, no bread, no buns, none of this other stuff. Breakfast food does not begin with B. Biscuits begin with B. But
yeah, you can't say
it's a category, right?
Yeah, that's... And also bonbons, it's like, what letter does a food begin with? That's very...
The first... That's obvious enough.
I'm arguing bonbons. Frankly,
Okay.
I have never said, would you like a bonbon? To someone. Sates would totally pick broccoli, apparently. And Alan would pick bread. I would probably, yeah, even though I don't eat it that much, I think I would go with Alan with the bread because, yeah, burritos are better. And if I could have access to more burritos, I would totally be down for that. But I have more access to bread. Do you know what I mean? And so bread is more of a limiting factor, it feels like.
Well, bread does have a, but bread is in a lot of other things. I could have said burger, right?
But if you say burger, I think you only get the patty.
Yeah. So you think of like one reason I said burrito.
Thing, like,
it's a combination.
Beef,
right?
If you say beef, are you allowed to go and have a burger, like just the middle part? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, just the patty.
I mean, I feel like it needs to be a multiple choice thing, and the categories aren't clear enough. So there's like, yeah, this is too difficult a question, we've decided. But, you know, hot take, Chris would go burrito, I would be bread. Chris says a burger for me would be the whole thing. So does that mean that you're never allowed to take, if you have a burger, are you allowed to deconstruct it to use those buns for something else? Or do you basically always does it have to be a burger at one point? It's like, for example, if you wanted a hot dog, could you use burger buns, put it to be a burger, and then deconstruct those burger buns and use a burger bun hot dog, if you know what I mean? Is that allowed, as long as it's been a burger at one point? Javier says banana. Oh, is toast allowed? I would say that toast is part of bread. It's
a preparation of bread.
Yeah.
So if you were to say bread, then I would assume you would get bread in all of its shapes and forms and preparation manners. You would have the ability to have the buns as part of a burger. You'd have, the toast. You could have just anything that involves bread would qualify, I would say.
And presumably we're just using English for this, like our own dialect of English. Because I'm trying to think if I know things in French or German that I would particularly want to eat. But if you put hot dogs into the burger buns, you'd have a hog burger, apparently. But yeah, that's a good question. That's like, yeah, something to ponder for the ages. Could you make cake from bread flour?
I think you can. I think most flour can be used when it comes to cake. And I'll be honest with you, I never really thought about until a few months ago when we started doing more cooking, my wife and I, that there were multiple kinds of flour. I didn't know this. I just thought that there was like the white stuff, and then like the corn flour, which is the yellow sort of. But
there's wholemeal flour.
Yeah,
you've got self-raising.
Yeah, you've got a lot of different kinds of flour. So maybe, and obviously, when you have the more you get into that, the hobby of cooking, the more you realize just how many different types of flour there are. Or go to a well-stocked grocery store and you realize you're looking at the shelf going, I just want flour.
Apparently, Kate has 4 types of flour in their apartments right now.
Show off.
Yeah, I'm going to go with this. Javier does remind us of bratwurst, which reminded me of bockwurst. And so you could not have bockwurst either. And yeah. Anyway, so where exactly are you and what time is it? So let's have a simple question.
Sure. I'm on the 8th floor of a apartment building in central Warsaw, Poland. The planet is Earth. I forget the name of the wing of the galaxy, but Milky Way galaxy. And local time zone is 11:25 a.m.
11:25. 1 hour ahead of Nigeria, or UK time.
Yeah, that's one of the funny story. People often it's often very easy to forget sometimes about the Southern Hemisphere, and I lived in Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru for about 9 months all told, and everyone is like, sometimes you'd have friends that go, "What time zone is that on?" And then you're like, "It's Eastern time zone, man." And you're like, "Wait, what? I thought it was like," and then I was like, "What? You thought what? Where in the world did you think this was? It's directly south of the U.S. You know, the west coast of South America is broadly fairly close to the east coast of North America, and as a result, if you're used to thinking on, Eastern time, as a lot of Americans are, you find a lot of those comparisons happen like that as well. But
So, let me ask you, what are a few of your favorite things to do?
drink coffee, sleep in, play 51 clubhouse games with my wife.
51 Clubhouse games?
Yeah, it's a video game title for the Nintendo Switch, and you take.
Oh, is that the one where it has the Hanafuda cards and it's got like
Yes.
all the old stuff?
Yeah, that's one of the 51. So it has your classic sort of public domain board games that have been around forever. Everything from chess to checkers or drafts as you might call them, to Gomuko, which is the 5 in a row game you play on a Go board, to the Hanafuda game. There is a Mario themed card deck, which is really cool. There's a version of blackjack. There's like a toy curling sort of game. There's a toy boxing sort of game. There's a lot of little different games that you play, but they're all really well designed. And as a master class,
as you would expect from Nintendo, to be fair.
Well, the expectations from Nintendo are certainly very high, but at the same time, they don't always have a perfect track record on making sure every game gets the quality of life things that it needs or whatever. But they did a really good job with that game. If you like board games and you have a Switch, and you have someone in your home that you like playing with, a lot of these games are 2-player up to 4-player potentially. Not every game lends itself to every player count, of course. Chess is still very much a 1 or 2-player game, but some games do lend themselves to up to 4.
And that kind of sparks, thoughts of, like at what point does a board game stop being a board game, which is, a very light-hearted philosophical question, as opposed to the philosophy of ethics and stuff and obligations that we've had recently. I mean, I don't want to talk about that. I just want to kind of raise the thing, because we could talk about that for 2 or 3 hours, I'm sure. But it's just something to ponder in people's minds. Anyway, so to finish off, let me ask you, in the past couple of weeks, what has a typical day been like for you?
So I'll get up anywhere between 10 and 11 a.m. I usually I've tried, not always succeeded at this, I've tried to make a to-do list for stuff the night before, because sometimes it's a continuation on things, and sometimes it's just a thing to do. Make your to-do list before going to bed for the next day. There's usually at least one sort of short-term goal. There's a thing to do with the virtual playtesting group. There might be a game that needs developing. So I'm working on those things for most of the afternoon. Maybe there's a blog post to write or some social media stuff to catch up on. Evenings are sometimes, but not always, dedicated to playtesting. There's often some importing of things into Tabletop Simulator, and otherwise sort of keeping track of everything else happening in the world. In the after dinner, there's usually some games of some kind, some games with my wife. We're getting back into Mario 64, of all things. Another sort of title that's come to the Switch. They've taken 3 classic Mario games and brought that to the Switch. Go to bed around midnight, 1 a.m., sometimes a little bit later. And when it comes time for the weekend, sleep in a little bit and maybe go exploring a little bit.
Cool. So you still get to explore Warsaw and the world around you.
We're trying. The reality is that things aren't as not everything has necessarily opened up, but the also most of that we've already seen or done or enjoyed most of the stuff that Warsaw has to offer that is in fact open. Hopefully, some more stuff will open up in the future, but there's definitely time to explore and research and stuff.
And so that feels like you're still managing to enjoy life and be productive. So,
I mean,
well
what's the other option?
Well, the other option is to wallow in depression.
Yeah, and certainly that's a challenging thing for some folks, but ain't no one got time for that.
Yeah, but like for those who are struggling,
Of course,
lots of love and yeah, please reach out for help if you feel like you would benefit from it. But now let me remind everyone as we move into our main topic that you should feel free to oh my god, this week I am just totally off the ball. Let's try that again. Please feel free to comment, ask questions, and follow. All those lovely things as we talk about how running a playtest can be a little bit like chairing a meeting. How do we encourage the sorts of discussions we need? What are some of the problems that can arise in a post-game discussion? And are there any problem behaviours to watch out for? How much of this whole post-game discussion is the responsibility of the designer, and how much of it is the responsibility of the playtesters? And you've suggested we also touch upon the differences between approach and responsibilities between online and physical games. And those are the questions that by the end we'll check in again and we'll see if we've managed to answer them all. So can you go back a step and explain and define yourself? Define your theory.
Okay, so the chairperson theory is it kind of harkens back. I should rewind the time machine here. So this is 2004. I am going to college in Kentucky, and I'm taking the capstone business class at my college called strategic management. And the teacher has a reputation at this college for just being a hard-nosed old man who has seen it all, done it all, has no time for your BS. These are the rules, follow the rules, full stop, end of. And of course, naturally, you're a snot-nosed 22-year-old who thinks you know everything the world has to offer. So in this class, he thought of himself, the teacher, as the chairman of the board. And when you are giving a presentation in this class, you are not talking to the teacher and the other kids in class. You are talking to the board of directors, and I am the chairman of the board. Are there any questions? Okay. So from that, you kind of get this sense of like there's a bit of posturing there, but also he's the professor. He gets to be, the person in charge. So I have from 16 years ago or whatever, this flashback of feeling like there's one person in the room that's in charge. So that's kind of where this concept sort of started. When you're doing a playtest as a designer, the chairperson theory is basically you want to be that one person in charge, not a overbearing, I'm going to dictate exactly how everything will happen, but I have a specific purpose and a reason for everything that I'm doing here. So the chairperson's task on most meetings is to get certain questions to the floor. Their job is to get certain answers, to initiate certain discussions, to ensure everyone is heard from. The last thing you want as a designer is to only hear the loudest person's thoughts. So So as the chairperson, it is your job to do all that. It is your job to hear from everyone. It is your job to get the specific questions you might have answered in whatever way you feel is most appropriate. Your job is also to facilitate the sorts of discussions that let people riff off of each other. And that can be anything from just asking open-ended questions to asking someone else, and so what are your thoughts on all of this? For example, we've heard person A speak for a while. Person B, what do you think of all of this? Is there anything you'd like to riff off of, or things like that?
So we've got everything's addressed to the chair, which seems like perfectly analogous, because in a playtest, sure, there is some side discussion, like, okay, I actually agree with what that person over there said, just riffing off that, but ultimately it is meant to be for the benefit of the designer, developer.
Exactly.
And so it does make sense to have everything addressed to the person who's facilitating the playtest in question. The other thing is to ensure everyone is heard from, which seems perfectly correct. Are there any other similarities that you can think of?
There's generally this sense that, at least in most meetings, when you think of the chairperson, by definition, they are thought of as the leader. If there's ever a question of who needs to defer to whom, the chairperson is usually the person favored. That's not to say that other people aren't listened to or whatever, but as the designer, this is your playtest. This is your opportunity to learn about stuff. Whether you are paying money to attend an event, or you're paying with your time in the culture of reciprocity that most of these groups have, you're paying for it. Get the most from your time or your money. And as such, it's easy to remember that when you have specific questions, it might help to even write them out. What are the questions you want to answer in this playtest? Write them out beforehand. It can help some folks to have a script of how they want to phrase their questions. So as a chairperson, this all comes back to you. This comes back to your ability to lead the meeting, your ability to facilitate it, and the better you get at that, the more productive a meeting can be.
And Sates says that this is part of the reason why they prefer to have that video feedback if they can't be in real life, so people can show agreement rather than repeating someone else's entire point.
Yeah,
and for sure, when you're facilitating a meeting, it's worth having these sorts of signs within the community. For example, I noticed that within the LARP community, within the LARP community, it's a very common thing for this sort of applause to show that you agree with someone. And on stream, I've started, just heart or, more vigorously nodding my head, because not everyone understands what this means.
So so obviously not every playtest can happen IRL or with video. So what often happens is...
Why not?
Bandwidth limitations, technical limitations. A non-zero number of people still struggle to get Tabletop Simulator and Discord working.
But if you finish your playtest and then move the discussion afterwards to video...
You could. I don't know of many groups that do that, but I'm sure there are some. So you could make it a video chat, but most that I've been to don't. But even within the limitations of audio, it's still fairly easy to hear a mm-hmm or a agreed or things like that. Something that is not intended to break the flow.
Honestly, I would not have interpreted that mm-hmm as I agree. I would have interpreted that as I hear what you've said, but I disagree on this part.
Okay, so it does help well, again, within the strictures of the audio format, and maybe there's room for a video chat to come after a playtest. Certainly, Discord makes elements of that easy. Yeah, so the other thing that often happens is as part of wanting to hear from everyone, you want to ensure that everyone gets a good chance to speak. So regardless of anyone's ability to interrupt or be louder than everyone else.
For sure. And yeah, Xate suggests if someone says agree in the middle of a point, most likely the person stops talking and says, I'm sorry, what? Didn't hear you there, and then it goes back and forth a few minutes while they clear up the person wasn't trying to interject. And we can get into the topic of, I know that Protospiel Online, which is coming up next weekend, has a policy that before a game you show video just to get to know everyone, to remind yourself that there's a human on the other side, and then you play the game, and then afterwards you go back to video, which allows everyone to get those visual signals, which is quite a nice thing. Yeah, it sounds like you've decided that for whatever reason, because you do run virtualplaytesting.com, and why have you decided that you would choose not to go back to video?
Well, we never went to video in the first place, so we wouldn't go back to video. At the same time, this is literally the first I've heard of Protospiel Online doing that. They didn't do that the last time.
Okay. I mean, I think it was meant to be a policy. It's possible that
it was not done at the first event. It was not done at the beta. If this is something new that they want to do during the next event, then it sounds like it could help. But this is literally the first time I've heard of that policy, or that policy being used at that event.
Interesting. Well, I guess then the question becomes, is this something that you have? It sounds like this using video isn't really something you've considered for virtual playtesting.
Well, no, we haven't. And again, part of that comes back to bandwidth limitations. Some people aren't interested in being on video, but to be honest, it's never really been a consideration. Maybe we'll talk with the team and see what they think.
So, getting back to how you can do a generally good job of being a chairperson.
Okay, so whether it's the audio format or the video format, making it clear whose turn it is to speak really helps. So what I usually do in most games is I'll basically name a specific person. Okay, Bob, so you won the game, so let's start with you. Questions, comments, feedback, anything that comes to mind. So I've specifically named the one person I'd like to hear from, and I've given them a mostly open prompt for whatever comes to mind. In the ideal sort of playtesting situation, there will be a couple of rounds. So what I'm hoping to get during this first round is, again, anything that immediately comes to mind. So the stuff you wrote down, perhaps, or the burning thoughts you just can't wait to get out. So that's that's sort of the first element. At that point, I'll usually say, okay, let's go clockwise around from Bob. Carol, same question, comments, thoughts, feedback, anything that immediately comes to mind. So everyone now knows it's Carol's turn. And then David, who comes after Carol, knows that he's next, so he can kind of begin putting his thoughts together. As and if people interrupt or kind of step on each other, I'll try to give them a chance to say their immediate thought, but also to come back to the person whose turn it was.
And then you'll go to Ellie, and if Ellie's you know,
Exactly.
BBBB,
Exactly.
and then you'll start going around with your questions, presumably, if you've got more pointed questions after that.
Yeah, so some questions are best asked, like, and that's it's sort of a way of framing a question. So I might start so when I want a specific person to answer a question, I'll start by addressing them by their name. And the nice thing about most of the online groups is that you do see in the Discord server their real first name, so it's easy to address them. It's not, okay, Ladybug78, you know, it's Ellie, or it's whatever their name is. So when I want to address that one specific person, I'll start with that name. If otherwise, I might say, okay, open question for everyone. How would you describe your strategy? And if more than one person kind of starts talking at a time, okay, Alice, go ahead. You know, so addressing people by name helps, making it clear who you want to speak about what also helps. Also being able to kind of know when things are going into a question of, like, a lot of questioning circles, or I've heard some people call it the playtesting vortex, the feedback vortex, where you just start talking in circles all the time. So yeah.
So when you have going rounds, do you stick with, let's say there were A, B, C, D, E playing, would you keep going round in that order, so A is always the first person to answer each question, or would you move it a little bit each way, let's say?
It sometimes depends on the situation, but having a solid first player, for want of a better term, has definitely made things fairly easy when I've done multiple rounds. The reality is that once you've done the first round and everyone kind of gets their immediate thoughts off their chest or out of their head, a second round isn't always as necessary. It doesn't always happen. If you're trying to structure this, you know, very rigidly, you can find that the structure kind of breaks down when the real world hits it. So there's a balance between having a rigid structure that can't change according to how things actually flow, and no structure whatsoever. So you're looking for that middle balance there.
I mean, I know that in the real world, I've often asked people for opinions on particular things to do the thumbs up, thumbs down, which doesn't really work in online audio-only testing. Like, if I wanted to quickly say, hey, how did you feel about this aspect? Do you feel like you were engaging with this particular aspect at all? Give me a vague double thumbs up to -2.
Yeah.
And is there a quick way to get that without the bias of people going toward the bias that I mean when people kind of start to go towards the answers they've already heard? Because that's the problem with keeping on going round the circle, because maybe Alice says their piece, and by the time it gets to Ellie, the real life Ellie we know would never do this, but maybe this is a completely different Ellie. Maybe this is Ella. And so maybe this Ella's, by the time they've got into them, if like 4 people have said one thing, they're like, oh, maybe I won't even bother saying that. But they've got this really important thing that it would have been nice for them to address.
So one thing that does happen sometimes with playtesters is person A gives their thoughts, person B has many of the same thoughts. So they can definitely say, oh, I agree a lot with what person A said, but also ... So person C, person D, person E. Each person has the opportunity to say, I agree with that person, I disagree. Yeah, so to each their own. So it's a theory that is always being refined. It's not a hard and fast rule. But yeah.
I mean, I think this is the thing using apps, if you're asking people to download a thing, then it can be a bit much to ask a playtester, but it really depends on the people, I guess. and how much they, for want of a better word, owe you. Like if people are there because there's some reciprocation, for sure there's a sense of, okay, I'm going to go along, I'm going to jump through some of your hoops, and people will jump through mine and give me the energy, and it's all about how much. But if you have something like that you're wanting people to do, I guess it would be an important thing to warn people about that ahead of time. I've never heard of that being used in a playtest, but it might be an interesting thing to consider. Do you have any response to that, Chris? Looks like you had something to
I've
say.
never asked anyone to use an app as part of a playtest outside of the expected things like Tabletop Simulator and Discord. If you wanted to get a poll, then you could certainly build those into Discord pretty easily with the poll bot. So the person that is the designer can ask a question, phrase it in the way that the poll bot can recognize, and then people can respond with the various emoji. So for example, I could, like, you've seen the posts on Facebook that say, oh, like it, so click the thumbs up button if you like this option.
Sure, but the problem
love if you like this one.
those is that they give, again, this sort of bias of, oh, I see what other people have decided. So maybe you want to go with the flow, maybe you don't, you feel, okay.
Okay.
Whereas Twitter polls, for my money, are a lot more scientific, relatively speaking, than Facebook polls. Because whilst neither is going to be properly scientific, if we actually got 1,000 people to vote on a Facebook poll, I still wouldn't trust it, because you get to see everything ordered in order of popularity. And so when you're voting, you get to see what your friends have voted for. And you know that other people are going to see what you voted for. Whereas on Twitter, it's anonymous. People don't know who you voted for, so you're more likely to be able to be honest, even if it's an unpopular opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't get to see the results until you yourself have voted.
Yeah, some designers do use Google Forms for that as well. If you want to provide further feedback in written form, that can be provided in a semi-anonymous way. I don't personally use those. I think they can be useful to some folks, but yeah, in terms of having a poll, it could be helpful. I haven't really used them myself. I have felt that most of the time when I'm doing a playtest, everyone knows they're free to speak their mind. They're free to agree. They're free to respectfully disagree. And if anyone feels like they have more to share, I do make it fairly clear that they are able to private message me on Discord. They can connect with me on Facebook or whatever. I'm always open to hearing more from them. And on multiple cases, there are some of the better feedback I've gotten from people has come from those PMs. Hey, I've had a chance to think about that thing, and I wanted to riff off of what Bob said, for example.
And hello, Alex. It's lovely to see you jump in. Oh, I never checked in with you, Chris. What time do you need to be done by? You didn't tell me.
4 p.m.
Okay.
I'm in no hurry, but we shouldn't take all day here.
Javier, just to go through the comments, Javier says randomizing speaking order instead of going in the same order every time is a good idea. Sate, talking about going round in circles, says that going round in a constant player order stifles the free flow of conversation and puts this pressure on you to have an amazing thought out of no context. I think this pressure can be for the first person, especially because I've noticed that some people, they can be a bit uncomfortable if they're like, and so, yeah, this is a thing where we are, oh, and hello, Jeroen. It's lovely to see you. And congratulations on passing your, is this a citizenship test or something? I think Jeroen had. But congratulations. So it's about making people feel safe. And I guess this leads us into problems arising. Now, one problem is, potential problem is playtesters feeling uncomfortable, not being ready to say their piece when they're called upon. Playtesters may be even not feeling like this is a safe space. So how can you address those things?
Okay. So in terms of what I have done over dozens of playtests and months of playtesting, going around in a circle gives everyone a chance to understand where they are in terms of what's happening. So if I'm third or fourth in the order, you have the opportunity to formulate your thoughts. If you've been taking notes as you're playing or playtesting, as a lot of people do, you can go back to your notes and star them, or whatever noting system you have. As a safe space goes, we do everything we can to make a place feel as safe as possible, both to speak your opinion and to feel like this is a non-judgmental space. If anyone has any thoughts on doing that better, we're all ears.
And
but in terms of can problems arise, absolutely. Are people interacting? Of course, problems can arise.
sure.
So
it's kind of a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
It's more, okay, when problems arise, how do we address them?
Okay.
And if someone is feeling uncomfortable, and again, well done, your own. Sorry, the comments are moving faster than I'm able to click sometimes. So well done on passing your first aid, your own, again. And if someone is feeling uncomfortable about being the last person, is it enough to just, when you call upon them, say, okay, Charlie, do you have anything to add? And then that gives Charlie the permission to say, not really.
Yeah,
and then you move on to Danielle or Dave.
Yeah. So what sometimes happens is a playtester doesn't have anything else to add. Sometimes they'll specifically say, "Yeah, Alice said everything I was going to say," or Bob had a lot of really good ideas I agree with. That's all they have to say. No one is ever under any pressure to come up with brilliance. In fact, one thing that often happens with playtesters, they sometimes feel like they need to create the solution to the problem they mention. And I need to do a better job emphasizing this myself, but your job as a playtester is to find the problems. My job as the designer is to find the solutions to those. So don't feel the need to be, brilliant on the spot. No one, very few people ever are. And because virtual playtesting is a group of designers predominantly, with a lot of rockstar playtesters as well, you do have designers that will say, "Oh, this is how I might do it if this were my game," or "This is how I might solve that problem." And those are sometimes worth listening to because everyone's got a different design take and a different design philosophy. So, but your job as a playtester, first and foremost, is on expressing your feelings, is on helping the designer understand what worked, what didn't work, and in trying your best to express what didn't work. And you do that as best as you can, and then you find yourself putting the pieces together later on. So just as an example, I might look at my notebook where I've taken a few pages of notes from things. I'll just write everything down as fast as I can in the flow of the meeting. The next day, or whenever I go back to play with that game again, I'll usually come back and I'll star the stuff that feels like a good idea or feels more exploring. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I think that this brings us to, okay, so Rowan asks, do you often experienced that testers have a better idea of other strategies or what is not useful than the designer.
Well, they're
I mean, it
seeing.
comes to the observational, what can we manage to observe, versus the empirical lived experience.
So there are definitely times when a tester has an idea that a designer can or should go, that's actually a really good idea. I'm going to implement that in the next version. If you're playtesting something for the first time, it is often, you can't really know the game's history. So what sometimes happens is someone will suggest something and the designer will respond, actually, that was my first idea. That idea was in a previous version of the game. I changed that because ... So that's one thing that often happens. But as a playtester, ideally, you feel comfortable sharing your feelings about everything that you've experienced in the game, and you feel like everything you were about to say is valuable and worth listening to, and it is. So there are definitely times when the testers have a better idea than the designer, yes.
I mean, that's always a challenge, isn't it? When exactly to talk back. Because, I mean, I noticed it, I'm not going to name names here, but yeah, I saw someone where someone said, hey, this is a problem, that this is unbalanced, and then the designer went into literally maybe a 10-minute rant about how actually it was correct, that part was correctly balanced, that they weren't understanding parts of it properly. And to be honest, the designer, and if you play optimally, it might be true. But that gets to the point that, games are emotional things, and someone who plays the game in the real world isn't going to spend, the same amounts of time as you understanding everything. So even if potentially the chocolate strategy versus the dinosaur strategy is actually perfectly balanced, someone might say, hey, the dinosaur strategy just isn't strong enough. You need to have beef up the chocolate rewards in this game.
So at that point, ideally, the designer is able to listen to this and then getting into asking probing questions. So ideally, the designer is not defending what they know for what they know as facts, because again, perceptions are important here. I felt the chocolate strategy was overpowered or whatever. So I might ask, okay, why did you feel that way? And can you show me, like, is there a specific card that felt overpowered? Was it this combination of this card and this card that felt overpowered? So there's something that's driving you to feeling this way. Can you help me understand that? And sometimes the answer is, it's just a feeling. Okay, that's fine. You can't. Not everything needs a concrete example. Sometimes it is a thing you had not seen before as a designer. So I saw as the playtester that when you take card A and card B, and then you do this special power, that combination is overpowered. And the designer has to go back and say, okay, I didn't know that. Thanks for pointing that out. Because whenever you combine thing A, thing B, thing C, there are a lot of different combinations. And playtesting is one of the ways you catch those.
Sure, if things can combine, then each thing that you add, it becomes, the possible number of combination accelerates massively.
Exactly.
And there might be things that you've not considered. It might be that the playtester is completely wrong, but I think the question, why do you feel that way, strikes into, maybe it's all about therapy and almost eliciting, okay, because it is about their experience. It's about, okay, so they've played it, and now why are you even having this conversation at the end? It's because you want the playtesters to tell you their opinions, to tell you their lived experience, to share that with you, to tell you, okay, this is what it's like. Because in theory, if I could, divide my brain and then alter my certain personality, so maybe there would be like this part of my personality here, that might actually be a better way, and then reassembled them all into my brain. So suddenly, I've got like all the lived experiences. Like that would be a cool way to playtest.
I mean, I'm definitely a fan of the Vulcan mind meld.
Like if I could have like 10 like little parts of the childish, fun-loving Bez, and then like kind of randomly kind of shake them up, give them a bit of variance, and then in my head.
Yeah.
That would almost be like the ideal playtest.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said about going back to like why people are saying what they're saying. There's something that they want to express, and sometimes they're able to specifically show what that is. Sometimes it's just a feeling. But you as a designer, your job right now is to listen to everyone, make sure you understand where they're coming from, and write stuff down. That's your job in the moment. Your job is not to get defensive. Your job is not to respond, well, actually, you played it wrong, and this is the way you're supposed to. Yeah, so that's not one of the best practices to recommend.
And for sure, whether it's a chairperson or a therapist, the key thing about that here is that neither of them speak very much. And so Johan, who asked, do testers have a better idea than the designer? To some extent, it doesn't really matter. What does matter is that people have a different experience and different opinions. And It's all about being there to listen to your playtesters. It doesn't mean you necessarily act upon it.
So TLDR, listen to everything, write down everything, come back to it later and consider what's actually worth implementing in the next version.
Okay, so Johan's other question, should a playtester play the game more often, or do you only want fresh looks at the game? And I mean, I've got thoughts on this, but you go first.
Sure. So this will kind of depend on what kind of playtest you want to run. Personally, I like it when playtesters have played a game before. There will be rules to update them on about what's changed since the last version. So if it's kind of a mix, and that does happen, I'll start teaching it fresh as though I'm teaching it for the first time for the benefit of most playtesters. And then I'll go to Alice and say, okay, Alice, so I think the last version you played from a few weeks ago, this thing was in the game. Do you remember that? Okay, that's not in the game anymore. Instead, it's now ... So there's sort of a catch-up thought process alongside the learning the new process, but both are helpful. If I get the chance to playtest with multiple people that have all played the game before, then awesome, because we can then okay, you guys know how to play? Great. This is one thing that's changed. What I want to see in this playtest is how you interact with insert the deeper level of strategy you really get to.
Like maybe it's not just the chocolate mechanic. Maybe it's the carob mechanic that you're going into.
The carob?
Carob.
Okay.
You know, white chocolates. You know, like as opposed.
Yeah. So the idea here is that when you're playtesting for the second, the third time, you get to see the crunchier side of that engine, the more strategic side of the whatever layers there are in the game. And sometimes you get to the point where you're playing at that deeper level, as deep as the designer hopes you get to it. And yes, sometimes you can get a better score than designer. In fact, I don't always win my own games. In fact, it's fairly rare. And I'm okay with that, because it is a good sign. I feel like I can see the strategies that they are trying, and because ideally there are multiple strategies that work. You might have the chocolate strategy, you might have the dinosaur strategy, you might have the carob strategy. So these three strategies hopefully ideally balanced, but yeah.
I mean, Alan says, I don't think the designers should have any subjective input in a playtest session. They can answer any questions when needed, of course. I think the chair or facilitator should ideally do a demo. Oh no, we're not talking about the facilitator being a separate person as a designer. So normally the designer is the chair or facilitator.
Yes.
So there's just not the people and money in most board games to facilitate this, unless you're selling millions of copies, which of course is very possible, depending on the, if Hasbro doesn't sell millions of copies and it's been a flop in their eyes, which is totally fair, then
yeah. What I'm talking about when I'm talking about the chairperson theory, I'm talking about a role and a mindset that the designer adopts, that they are in control of the questioning and trying to get answers from people. They're trying to get that feedback from everyone instead of leaving it open to just anyone say anything. And that does happen sometimes. Sometimes it's because that's the way the designer likes to work, and that is a totally valid way of doing it. In some cases,
the whole thing is that the first sentence of here, whereas running a playtest can be like chairing a meeting. It's entirely a metaphor. As Chris says, it's a different mindset. It's a way to remind yourself to stop off conversation if it's not helpful, to provoke the conversation that you feel is helpful, and to make sure everyone is heard. And what
so I think there's definitely a lot of points here that the designer or the therapist or the chairperson, whatever role they want to call themselves, you are in listen mode. You need to listen far more than you're speaking. And you're listening because this is the thing you came here to do, to listen to what they have to say. And the more time you spend talking, the less time other people do. So to do that, and to do that listening skill well, it does help to give some structure to the specific kinds of questions you're looking for. So I want to find the fun in an early place of the game. So I might ask, what moments were the most fun? What moments felt the most boring? If I'm looking to check the balance, I might ask, what felt balanced or what felt unbalanced? If I'm looking for something that is further on in development, I might ask, did you notice any accessibility issues? How well do the mechanics work with the theme? Did you feel like your decisions were meaningful, or did they feel like you could just play at random, that the strategic decisions didn't matter? So the specific questions you might choose to ask will be based on your goal for that specific playtest, and also perhaps where that game is in development.
I mean, that's something that Sate suggests for sure. If you're in earlier times compared to later times, you want to ask different questions. And Sate also suggests that if you're earlier on, you might want to have more back and forth conversation to say, hey, and also there might be more guidance involved. Whereas towards the end, it might be okay. You might need less input. You might. It also depends massively on the style of game, I would say, because if I'm showing off, you need to match for sure your target audience to the style of thing you're playing, and whether it's a party game. But
it would be really weird to have a party game where everyone's laughing and everyone's having a great time. Okay, everyone, let's come to order here. Let's have some very specific, serious questions. That wouldn't work.
I mean, you can ask pointed questions, but having seen that thing, having seen that laughter is the proof of the pudding. That is the key thing that, at least early on, tells you, is this game viable? And frankly, sometimes it's, okay, I have had intense hour-long discussions about Yogi that were massively helpful in the development of Yogi Guru. Where we talked about the notion of, I'm not going to get into all of it, but there's a lot of thoughts of like personal boundaries and personal agency in that game, and what my responsibilities are to the group as a designer, if you know what I mean. And we had a long discussion about, the touching of other people and how it can be problematic. And anyway, so like we had many hours worth of discussion that you would not have thought if you had just played Yogi Guru. But for sure, a lot of the cards were just, okay, let me brainstorm and do it solo. But you get what I mean? Like, you can have an in-depth discussion about anything. And I think that sometimes treating something in an in-depth way, like when I did, I don't know how long my review of, I think back in the day, I used to cut these off, you know, which we've already gone over an hour. I used to say this was an hour-long show, which now it's kind of like, okay, if the person coming on is, if at 75 minutes, I will be like, okay, whenever we run out of things to say, we will stop talking. There's going to generally be 75 plus minutes of content. Sometimes plus is another.
Sometimes plus, but yeah. Anyways,
but
it really could be. End of the day, as the designer, you know, this power of getting the information you want from the playtests is in your hands. Use it. Whether it's an open discussion, whether you have specific open-ended questions you want answered, or whether you have sort of a balance of the two, whether you go around in a circle or choose people at random, you are in control of how this thing goes.
I think that is the key thing, that you are in control.
Yeah.
And yeah, for sure. Jeroen, by the way, it was lovely to have you. Alan Outson talks about reciprocating and having a system where we take turns, and so we do a completely blind test. And I guess the benefits of that, I guess you've got someone else teaching the game. But if you're so far along to go that you need someone else teaching the game, otherwise you're worried about your own input, then at that point, that's where you should be giving the rules to someone else, it seems to me.
Yeah, so
often.
In many of the online playtesting groups, there is a culture of reciprocity. So you are expected to playtest for at least as many, you know, hours as you've asked of other people. So that's, so the reciprocation is built into the culture of most of the groups.
Sure. So if your game was a four-player thing for 1 hour, then you play 3 hours of other people's things.
That's the general ideal. As a facilitator for another designer, I haven't seen that before. And part of the reason for that is because that other designer won't necessarily know what questions to ask, or otherwise may ask stuff that isn't as relevant. So having the designer themselves run their own game prevents a potential bit of telephone happening between designer one wanting to ask designer two stuff, whatever. But yeah, if you're doing a blind playtest wherein the designer is literally just creating the room and tabletop simulator, then saying, okay, there's the rule book. I will prevent the game from going completely off the rails, but otherwise I'm here to observe. So I'm going to mute myself and let you guys figure this out. And that is a totally valid way of playing. It's not as common because it does require a bit more time and energy to do well, but it does happen sometimes.
Sure, and I think that having someone else even teach the game, even if you maybe say, okay, you're going to be the person teaching this game, I will give you the rules ahead of time, I'm happy to do that for you. I guess that requires you to have someone else who's wanting that of you also, because sometimes you can't reciprocate with exact style of work. I mean, playtesting is an interesting thing where we all fundamentally want extra time playtesting, but I mean, the style of playtesting can be so varied. And so I think there is definitely scope for doing something like what Alan is talking about, where instead of saying, hey, this is a blind playtest, you get the rules in front of you and you start right now. If we were in a Friday daytime situation, maybe we say, okay, this is a blind test, but I would like one person to start reading the rules ahead of time while I watch them before we start playing.
Yeah, like I said, that is possible but uncommon. And part of
Sure,
that
it's
is because you're
uncommon, but it doesn't mean that it's not something that would behoove a lot of people. Or it's something that we could consider and add to our arsenal of tools.
Yes. The idea here is that there's always room for improvement. There's always things that can be tried. I think part of the reason it's uncommon is because the ask of time gets bigger. You're asking someone to specifically take the lead to learn the game well, and not just well enough to play, but well enough to teach. That's a higher bar, and as such, it does take more time. You then have this. I personally would probably have this fear of, am I actually teaching the game right? Am I actually playing it right? Ideally, if you as a designer are looking for a way to ensure someone else can teach the game, what I have done it with How Much Money actually in the past, and a couple of other games, has been out of necessity. So story time. I've lived in Eastern Europe for a fair bit of time playtesting in the real world, and language barriers are a thing. Not everyone speaks English well enough to playtest the game. In some cases, that's not as important because there's a lot of symbols and numbers and whatever. But so we playtested one of the games one time, had a good time. Some more people came in that didn't speak English well enough to understand my explanation. So I turned to the player that won the game, the player that seemed to really understand the game, and I said, "Hey, could you explain this in Romanian for our new folks that just sat down? And you know how to play. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. But can you teach them how to play in Romanian so that they can understand?" And what followed was, a long 2 or 3 minute string of Romanian. I assumed they were sort of following the same sort of format that I did. So I was kind of laying out the different kinds of cards and the different pieces that would be helpful for them to kind of show those off as you played. So at the end of the game, or at the end of that, long string of Romanian, I saw lots of nods. I then assumed that they got the basics of it. But then I said, if there are any questions, feel free to ask, other people at the table, because they have all played now. So I'm still the designer. I'm still controlling the situation. But at the same time, someone else teaching the game definitely proves to me that they understand it well.
Sure.
And they did play correctly. So.
I mean, yeah, there's definitely a lot of ways that we can do these things. And yeah, like addressing the notion of giving back time. I guess it seems to me like if you're asking one person to spend 2 hours reading some rules that are actually quite dense, then it might be the case that in itself, at least you're only asking one person to do it, and then you might say, okay, will you do this? And I watch you, and then later on I can give you 2 hours of testing for your 2-player game. So you can reciprocate in that sort of way.
Yeah,
but
it does take a bit more time and effort to set up, and a bit more time and effort to ensure everything is done. It can be done, and if someone were looking to do that, then there's definitely space to do that.
I mean, I guess what we come down to is, I think, I can't remember if it was you who said this, just a lot of people have made the same point, just basically respect other people's time.
Yeah.
And so it leads me to, I wanted to spend a bit of time on this bit, which is, as the chairperson, there are going to be people who are saying things which are basically irrelevant. Maybe people start talking about the graphic design or the artwork when it's not at a point where you're like, or maybe someone's like, okay, this bit's wrong. And you're like, okay, in your own mind, you're thinking, yeah, actually, I am going to change that for the next playtest. But now they're going off on a bit of a rant. So whether it's talking too long about something or talking about something irrelevant, how do you solve that?
So that's usually the portion of the conversation where I begin trying to get a word in edgewise. Thank you. That is helpful to know. What I need to get back to right now is the flow of the game. And I've heard a lot from you for now. Let's come back to you later. Alice, what are your thoughts on the flow of the game? So trying to acknowledge that they have been heard, trying to acknowledge that there is a focus of the session, and then trying to come back to that with a different person. So it's almost, but not quite, like hitting a reset button. Also, to some extent, when it comes time for that other person to start speaking again, I have occasionally made a joke like, okay, I'm going to put you on a timer now. Going to set my timer for 1 minute and go. That is entirely dependent on my relationship with them. But you know, if I have a relationship with them and I know that they're likely to do that again, that's the sort of thing I might pull. Add a little bit of humor to the situation, but also try to make, like, one thing that I'm trying to do better at is making the questions specific but open-ended. Well, how would you describe your strategy as one question? So I want to hear specifically about your strategy, not what you think about the graphic design or the fact that this thing happened in the 8th round of the game. Okay, so I'm hearing you, but let's come back to the question of how would you describe your strategy? Or in some cases, I might even rephrase the question to say, so what strategy did you have when you started the game? So hopefully between, you know, hearing that specific direct question and the cultural cue of let's focus on this other thing, you know, that does kind of bring back people to what's happening.
Yeah, I like that system. So acknowledge what they've said, make sure that maybe even puts in that, say that if you feel like you are already going to change it, this is a point where you can mention this. Okay, there's no reason to go on, or you don't need to mention that at all. If you're like, you know, I'm never going to change this, this is totally antithetical to the style of the game, just acknowledge, okay, this is what has happened, and mention that it reasserts what they've said, make them feel heard, then change the topic and change the person.
Yeah. So for better or worse, it's, yeah, again, it is very easy for one louder person to dominate a conversation in any sort of social group, in any situation. So by calling on people specifically, again, as the chairperson with you in control, you get to, you know, determine who you're trying to hear from. And some cases, you might want to hear the answer to that specific question. How would you describe your strategy from someone? In other cases, you might want to just hear, okay, Alice, what are your thoughts on all of this? What comments do you have right now? So it is a dynamic that is ever changing. I don't really have a solid analogy that comes to mind right now, but there's definitely it is definitely a dynamic sort of thing that trying to manage it whilst getting the answers you want out of the playtest. It's hard to do right, and I don't think I do it right all the time. But by kind of putting myself in the position of, this is how I want it to go. This is my goal for this time. I'm paying for this time, so I want to get what I can out of it.
I appreciate you acknowledging that, and for sure, this is something that we can all learn from others, and aspects of playtesting are probably something that I should have more people on to kind of chat about their unique approaches to these questions. But it has been a really nice discussion to hear your approach. Yeah, Xates is imagining 3 alpha gamers around a table. But
yeah, that could be fun. Said few people ever.
Do you have any final tips for us?
As you're asking, like, whenever you're thinking of the specific questions that come to mind, you want them to be open-ended. You know, so the how questions, the when, the what, the where, the why, those sorts of questions. I try to avoid the sort of binary answers. Oh, did you enjoy yourself? No. Instead of, what was the most fun? What was the most enjoyable part? What elements didn't work for you? You know, make those as open-ended as possible, such that they they give the playtester a specific avenue to, express themselves on the topic of your choice. Well, what do you say we make Alan's question the last question?
Sure. So, do you ever do this, Chris?
I often take notes as I'm playtesting, and it's those notes that will help me remember what I want to say during the
As a
feedback time.
playtester?
Yeah, as a playtester.
So, do you, as a chairperson, like as a person facilitating the playtest, do you encourage people to take notes?
I do. Some designers will be doing this already anyways, because that's just part of their habit. I can and should get better at explicitly telling people, feel free to take notes. In some cases, there are sometimes questions based on the game. Which question is, like, should I be writing stuff down about the game, my strategy, or should I be writing stuff about my feelings? I say yes. If in doubt, write it down, because the chances of you remembering exactly what you're thinking in that moment go up much higher when you've written it down. So even if you don't get to address everything, you still have it written down. You can come back to it. And what I've heard some folks do is, like, some of them will make a nice, numbered list, and after they've expressed that feeling or heard it expressed by others, they might just put a check mark next to it to show that that thing has been talked about. But most people already do write down their answers, and it's definitely possible to explicitly ask them to.
I would challenge like the statements most. I mean, I would be interested to kind of get some stats. I mean, like, I don't know if this is something you've started doing in the past couple of months. Like, we have playtested together a few times.
Yeah.
I've never written down notes, and I've never felt an encouragement from you to write down notes, to be honest. I don't know if you felt like you were saying this, but you didn't actually say it explicitly enough for me to.
Well, maybe I need to start
absorb
saying it.
that.
Maybe I need to start saying it more explicitly. And with that said, I definitely do keep a lot of notes, and it definitely has helped me remember what happened during a playtest, but also to some extent, I'm able to look back at someone else's playtest and go, "Oh yeah, hang on, I played that guy's game. What was it called? I think it was on July 23rd." And then I can go back in my notes. Like, this is, yeah, like I literally have like 4 notebooks of notes right now to look back on if I ever need to. But yes, I should be doing a better job at writing people answering to write down their thoughts and making it more explicitly clear that not only is this something I would appreciate you doing, it's something that I think is a good practice to get into.
I mean, if you said the words "feel free to write notes," I would say, yeah, of course, I'm free to write notes. If you said, like, I would appreciate you writing notes, then yeah, I would, ask more about it, and because it's your time, then do it. So I guess that's feedback, meta feedback, and this is kind of like the meta feedback on the playtesting, because, and yeah, I'm impressed as well, Xate. I know that some Paul Mansfield has a tiny little notepad around this size, where literally all he writes is the name of the game and the date. But
so as an example, I can talk, or I'm not going to show it on camera too much, but after doing some playtesting last night, so I'll do this from afar if anyone really needs to know, whatever. But part of the reason I'm taking notes on other people's games is to remind me what they did, like what they did that worked. It helps me give good feedback on their games. So, for example, with one game, I wrote down that the icons aren't helping, and as soon as I got that heard, I could like check mark it or cross it off or whatever. I'm also, to some extent, writing things down as I'm learning the rules. I'm also sort of rephrasing them into into words that make more sense to me. So part of that, like when you can rephrase something, it usually is a sense that you understand it pretty well. When you can rephrase it accurately and correctly. So I'm writing stuff down like that to ensure that I play the game correctly. Because the more games you try to fit into a day, the harder that can become to do correctly. Other things like just the flow of the game. If someone's specifically talking about the graphic design, I can make a point to come back to that because that's the thing they want to focus on. So I might take a note about the graphic design that they have, about how something might be clear or whatnot. But yeah, I wouldn't normally ask anyone to share their notes with me unless I knew they were taking really good notes and wanted to. I do assume your notes are for you for whatever purposes you might have, but at the same time, yeah, lots of different ways to use notes once you've collected them.
It would. I think that this is probably an anomaly because when I think back to all the years that we spent playtesting games at Royal Festival Hall and whatnot, I don't think I've seen. It's been incredibly rare that I've seen a playtester taking notes during a game. Okay. And that's my experience. So, I'll put up a Twitter poll on it to see what other people's experiences and just do you write notes during the game? Because it would be interesting. I can understand the utility, absolutely. It is again asking for extra energy. It is also removing someone from the headspace of the game. Obviously, if it's a party game, it doesn't let you get as emotionally invested as you might otherwise, because as you write notes, I do believe that you're going to. Sure, we need to be mindful of stepping out of ourselves and observing ourselves in terms of saying, okay, how am I feeling at this minute, and keeping a vague memory of this. But it's also important that we allow ourselves to feel those things that the game would evoke or provoke. I'm still not sure which is the correct word.
Evoke.
And evoke.
Yeah, evoke is like when you want to evoke someone's awe or happiness. Evoke is the more positive connotation. If I wanted to provoke someone, like if I want to provoke someone to fight me, or I want to provoke someone into doing, you typically evoke something positive, provoke something negative.
But would you evoke sadness if it was a tragedy? Because in that terms, it's a positive thing.
Yeah, I guess. English is weird, man.
Sure. Anyway, so the emotions that the game might evoke or provoke, you want to let yourself feel those emotions, whether those emotions are, boredom or whatever you want. I feel like I would rather watch people and take my notes of how I see them feeling, take notes of what they do, and
okay.
But that's a totally separate topic. I know you suggested we wrap it up after this question, so let's do this and then start the recap.
Sure.
So personally, I do this only when it's numbers involved. So I quite often at the end of a playtest, I might say to people, hey, okay, firstly, I'm going to say, how likely would you be to play it again out of 10? How much money would you be willing to pay for this copy? And also, how much money would you be willing to pay for this copy if it had certain things? Mm-hmm. And so in the past, I might have asked, okay, different formats, different possibilities of putting a game together. For example, flip and spell, should that be a physical thing? Should it be a digital thing? where I found out that people would be willing to pay a few quid for a digital thing, but don't particularly want it as a physical booklet. And those sorts of numbers questions are quite personal, and you might get some insanely low numbers where someone's like, yeah, I would pay a fiver for this game, at which point you realize, okay, this isn't actually viable, unless you get someone else at the table saying, I would pay 50 quid for this game. So you're like, okay, maybe it is viable. And those kinds of answers I don't think would have all been expressed if they hadn't been expressed privately. I guess that's but for those questions, I never actually asked them to present the answer. I just asked them to write it down and then give it to me on a bit of paper.
Yeah, and there's lots of different ways to do playtesting well. This is one way that has worked well for me. It is a method that continues to improve. At the same time, taking notes, whether it's like taking notes as the designer, should be something everyone is doing to remind yourself of whatever, or to understand what players are saying. At the same time, playtesters, I take notes because it helps me do stuff. It helps me be a better playtester. Not everyone needs to take notes to be a better playtester. That's just what works for me. And it may work for you.
Yep, and Alex is very much on board with that. It's, to be honest, arguably something that I could consider a bit more. I mean, if I get into, yeah. But let's check in with the questions. So, how do we encourage the sorts of discussions we need? I guess that there is a line to be drawn between being jerky and saying, okay, please, we've heard quite a bit about this. I'd like to hear from other people now. And you need to be forceful to some degree. How do we encourage the sorts of discussions we need?
There's friendly and firm.
What are some problems that can arise? I mean, we've talked about things veering off wildly. We've talked about are there any other problems that you want to chime in with?
So I've heard a few different terms for it, but I've heard it called the question vortex, or just talking in circles. And the challenge is exactly what it sounds like. Someone is proposing something, someone else has an answer to that, and at the end of the day, it comes back to playtesters. Well, a playtester's first and foremost job is to find the problems. You have found the problem. I have written it down. I have listened to it. Thank you for that. Let's move on. So the way to break that is to avoid, beyond just saying, well, don't argue in circles. The reason they're there, make this a one-way conversation. They are talking. You are listening. After they finish talking, thank you, move on. So escaping the vortex is usually a matter of just listening. As long as and if they're talking in circles, you can say something along the lines, okay, I've actually heard that from you before just 5 minutes ago. Let's give someone else a chance to speak now. Alice, what are your thoughts? And so on. So playtesting, the feedback hopefully is like every minute of that matters, and every minute of that time matters. So make the most of it.
Other than dominating a conversation, are there any other problem behaviors to watch out for?
Playtesters that decide their opinion is the only one that matters. This is fairly rare, but it has happened. You may have the alpha gamer type that insists their way is the only way, and it's usually my job to say that is a possible way, and I have already written it down, so thank you for that. Bob, what are your thoughts? Or to even more explicitly make a break here, if we were talking about strategy, Bob, what did you think of the theme of the game? So different person, different question, and so on. As you're on mute.
Exemplifying the alpha gamer very well, Derek says. Yeah, how much of this is the responsibility of the designer versus the playtester? I mean, it's clear that it's a joint responsibility. Does it matter?
So, playtester's job is to give feedback. And however that's done, whether you take notes, their job is to give feedback. Their job is not to fix the problem. Their job is just to note the problem. If you as a playtester have a suggestion for how to fix it, then by all means feel free to offer that. And then let someone else talk.
But when a conversation is going off the rails, let's say it's a new designer and they are letting the conversation go off the rails. I was meaning more the responsibility for the conversation itself rather than the development of the game. Is it suitable for a playtester to chime in and say, hey, you're talking about the graphic design, this really doesn't matter to the game?
Yeah. What can sometimes help is coming back to the whole, in the interest of time, designer, was there something else you wanted to ask us? Was there a specific question you wanted to ask us? What also happens is there is a culture in some of the online playtesting groups that once you've said your piece, you don't need to stay. You have given your feedback. Your time is valuable. You are now free to return to the lobby to jump in a new game. You're free to jump off, use the bathroom, get a drink, whatever you need to do. Once you have said what you want to say, you're under no obligation to remain. And what sometimes happens, probably 9 times out of 10, once the first person leaves, everyone goes, oh, holy crap, have we been talking an hour and a half? Yes, we have. Okay, sorry about that. Designer goes, so there was one more question I wanted to ask everyone, and I'll catch up with them later. So what did you think about ... So you're then kind of wrapping that up. So that one sort of cue sets in motion everyone else kind of finishing things up. And if two people decide they want to continue talking about something, then designer can and should go, okay, we're going to keep talking about this. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Danielle. I'm going to talk with Ella here. And yeah. So giving people that explicit
permission
ability. Yeah, exactly. Ability to move on.
And I think that this permission to leave is a key thing that can be more easily done in an online playtest, because in a physical situation where you might have maybe 3, maybe 4 tables, sure, at a convention it's quite different, but at a dedicated playtest event, on a good day at Royal Festival Hall, we would have 4 tables, which my understanding is now you have how many tables on a typical evening?
At any given, there are 10 tables built into the Discord server, and we can always add more. At any given time, we might have anywhere from 3 to 6 running.
I mean, I guess the other thing is that, as you say, once you leave, you are also able to engage with all the things in your house, not to mention everything else in the internet. And so it feels more like within a real life scenario, it feels more applicable to say, okay, designer, you've got an hour and a half, do with that as you will. And if it makes sense for you to playtest your game 10 times, because maybe it's a 6-7 minute game, and then you have like 10 minutes of feedback at the end, go for it. If it makes sense for you to playtest your game 0.25 times, because it's, that might take the better part of an hour, and then have half an hour for discussion, then go for it. It's you, designer, this
is your time to get the feedback you want, yes.
And so it feels like this kind of the online factor affords us a lot more flexibility, which can be a good thing in that people are allowed to come and go as they want, but yeah, for sure there's drawbacks that we can discuss, but in terms of like some people prefer a structure, because they're like, okay, I want to know what I'll be doing at such and such a time. So to recap everything, we've talked about quite a bit today. We have chatted about coffee, socks, games we've been testing. We decided that maple-sized ducks are better. We talked about burritos and bread, and no one mentioned bacon, which in retrospect was quite a surprise that no one mentioned bacon. Talked about, was it called the Nintendo 51 with the local play?
51 Clubhouse games, yes.
51 Clubhouse games.
And Mario 64, a different game.
Sure. And we talked about how everything being addressed to the chairperson, about making sure that everyone's been heard from, about making sure that people address your questions, about having pre-existing language, having some pre-existing conventions for gestures or things that aid us in our communication without interrupting things, making it clear whose turn it is to speak, address people by name, prompting them with the scope of what they should talk about. We talked about having apps for polls or Google Forms, or making sure you've got space for folk. Playtesters' obligations being about feelings and what worked and didn't work for you, about talking back or not talking back, and making sure you give people the space to say what they want, and making sure that it remains a safe space. Because as soon as you start vehemently disagreeing with someone, you take away a lot of that, because it can already be incredibly vulnerable for a playtester to share what they thought of something.
Mm-hmm.
About therapy as a metaphor, about stopping unhelpful feedback, acknowledging, changing the person, changing the topic. And then we talked about giving people permission to leave. Is there anything else we need to recap?
I think that's quite enough, yes.
And so I wish to say thank you to everyone who's been watching. I want to say thank you to all those lurkers out there, and also to Xate, Alan, Jeroen, Alex, people who've been contributing, and also Chris, and Javier, who've been chiming in with occasional input. And even if you've just been watching, thank you very much. I hope that you've enjoyed it. And most importantly, of course, thank you, Chris, for joining me for this conversation.
Welcome.
And Alan's quest for the holy socks continues, apparently, of where I apparently said that I don't wear socks. We will see if that is actually a thing. If you wish to find me, then I am stuffbybez.com, stuffbybez.bigcartel.com, twitter.com/stuffbybez, instagram.com/stuffbez, twitch.tv/stuffbybez, facebook.com/thingsbybez is also a thing, and stuffbybez@gmail.com if you wish to get in touch with me that way. And if people wish to find Chris, then how do you most like to be found?
Easiest way to find my games is going to be entrogames.com, ENTRO games.com. For more about the virtual playtesting Discord server, you can find the link to that on the virtualplaytesting.com website. There are also links scattered across the internet in the various Facebook groups relating to board game design.
And as we close up, I ask everyone watching, what are you looking forward to? Hopes and ambitions is over to you for this final section. And I invite everyone to share what they're hoping to achieve today or tomorrow or this week or whatever. Do you want to go first, Chris?
Yeah, so later today I will be talking with Jay Cormier of the Pitch Project as part of a virtual playtesting event. I'll be more specifically focusing on something that he built recently for someone, basically a virtual escape room. So I suspect this might be more of a personal interest, but definitely it's a public talk. It's open to anyone. I'm curious, how does that look? How does that work? how do you transform the notion of an escape room with this notion of a physical space into a virtual space. So I'm really looking forward to that later today in about 6 hours from now. And then obviously the weekend, the weather's looking pretty nice right now. The forecast called for a bit of rain, but you know, fingers crossed. But yeah.
And Alan there says they're looking forward to joining on the show soon and are going to be out for lunch shortly. They've not eaten out since March, and it may be the first and last for a while. Yeah, it's definitely becoming a thing that we constantly have to think about the health risks involved in eating out. And so all the best, and I hope you enjoy it. I am going to definitely be doing a bit of walking today. It's sunny. I also have to be doing a couple of quick chores, which I hope take go quickly. And Xate is looking forward to Monday. I hope that there are some nice things that happen in the interim. So I am going to, after this, raid Los Bros, who's a lovely musician. I'm going to do that. If you wish to join, feel free to share, spread the word. For the next streams, let's see if I can find this. So to check my future streams, then you want to go to stuffbybez.com/streams, and here's what you will find, where tomorrow I'm talking about the manifesto. I'm checking in with myself and others, and then Sunday chatting, comparing comics to board games, and I'm on every day at 10 a.m. and Tuesdays at 8 p.m. as you know. There is only one thing left to do, unless anyone else has anything left, and that is to say, oops, yeah, that's working. Bye, 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 bye. This is the goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. Now it's time to go. Bye, 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 bye. This is the goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye-bye.